Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Birthing Justice, Black Women, Pregnancy, and Childbirth, 2nd edition. Edited by Alicia D. Bonaparte and Julia Chinyere Opara. Narrated by Deanna Anthony. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to images present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Forward to the 1st edition. Shafia Monroe. This anthology is a testimonial to the Black women who have been leaders in the birth movement from the very beginning. Long before the term birth justice was coined, Black women used traditional childbearing knowledge, oral histories, human rights organizing, and policy work in their efforts to end inequities in maternal, infant, and child health. Building on resistance to the abuse of pregnant Black women during slavery and to the dismantling of our birth traditions and family structures, our foremothers paved the way for today's birth justice activism. This work continues to be critical because African American women's maternal health is in a state of emergency. Our cesarean section rate is disproportionately high. We experience the highest maternal mortality rate in the United States. We receive less medical support to continue breastfeeding past 12 weeks, and our infants are more than twice as likely to die before their first birthday than white infants. Only by giving women power to direct their birth experience, to access natural and home birth, and to breastfeed beyond 1 year will we be able to reduce intolerable rates of infant and maternal mortality. Our present-day birth justice movement honors its ancestors. We remember the Mississippi and Tuskegee nurse midwifery schools, the traditional childbearing group, childbirth providers of African descent, and others, while lifting up sheroes, including Billie Avery, Loretta Ross, Ayanna Aid, and Nonkululeko Tayimba, as well as organizations such as the Harlem Birth Action Committee, the International Center for Traditional Childbearing, Sister Song, Ancient Song Doula Services, Mobile Midwife, Black Women Birthing Resistance, Black Women Birthing Justice, Common Sense Childbirth, and many others. This anthology is intimate and captivating, introducing the women and organizations who have paved the way, alongside current movements and future hopes for women to reclaim their birthing rights. As we remember the ancestors and their struggles for safe and empowering childbirth, we must honor the traditional midwife. In Black communities in the United States and other parts of the diaspora, the midwife was historically the protector of birth, teaching women how to birth and safeguarding childbearing and mothering traditions. As this anthology documents, the starkest birth injustice is the systemic eradication of the Black midwife from her community by the Eurocentric patriarchal medical system. On the African continent, the demotion of midwives to traditional birth attendants mirrors the attack on traditional midwives in the United States. The after effect continues to this day. Fortunately, through the efforts of the birth justice movement, women of color are entering midwifery training and becoming midwives at record numbers. At the same time, the number of home births is rising in the Black community. Testifying to the resilience of Black women is a critical part of a holistic approach to restoring our health. It is exciting that the hidden her story of the battle waged by Black women and transgender nonconforming birthing parents against birth injustice is finally in print. Here is an essential source for high schools and colleges, midwifery and medical schools, birth workers, and birth activists. At last, we have a blueprint for improving health equity and enabling Black women, as well as other birthing parents of color, to believe in their body's sacred power and to direct their own birth experiences. Birth justice is on the rise. Women and transgender nonconforming birthing parents are mobilizing internationally to reclaim birth as beautiful, spiritual, and normal, and to demand their human right to birth and breastfeed their infants according to their own traditions. Women are returning to midwifery care as the norm, and many see midwives as guardians of normal birth. Black midwives are keeping it real and empowering families. It is up to all of us to ensure that this movement toward birth justice continues. I am moved by this tribute to birth justice and relieved that it is authenticated through its origins in the birth justice movement. In chronicling the movement, Julia Chinyere Opara, Alicia D. Bonaparte, and the women of Black women birthing justice engender pride, build camaraderie, and inspire action. Thank you, sisters, for your work. Forward to the first edition. Jean Flavin. It was a late August afternoon. I was riding a bike on the road that ran by our small family farm and got called into the house. I found Dad in the kitchen, doing dishes. Doing dishes? Though I was only 10 years old, I grasped the situation immediately. Mom, pregnant with her 5th and last child, had started labor. Dad left my little sister and me in the care of an older brother and drove Mom 19 miles to the hospital in the next county. He came home just before dawn to tell us we had a brother born at 3:03 a.m. Later that day, he packed us kids into the car and took us to the hospital. He stationed my little sister and me behind some bushes outside a window, and a few minutes later, a nurse brought my little brother into the room. Mom carried him over to the window so we could meet him. We were completely smitten. About a year later, Mom was diagnosed with cancer and hospitalized for treatment some 175 miles away. My dad moved to be with her, renting a room near the hospital while we 5 kids were looked after by a combination of siblings, neighbors, and other relatives. My little brother and I were briefly sent to stay with an aunt. I had only been separated from my parents on one other occasion, when my father was hospitalized in a neighboring state after a farm accident. I was heartsick both times. Years later, I asked Mom if she had been afraid she might not live. She replied in her matter-of-fact way, "I couldn't think about not surviving. I had 5 children, and the oldest was still in high school." Mom survived her first cancer diagnosis, but recently passed away after a second fight with the disease. The editors invited me to write a foreword to Birthing Justice at a time when I still felt grief over my mother's death keenly. Reminded me how what Julia Chinyere Opara refers to in the introduction as mother love as a radical praxis has played out in my own life, even though I'm not a mother and have never birthed a baby. These life experiences of welcoming a wanted, if not necessarily planned, child into a family, of being involuntarily separated from my parents, of feeling jackknifing grief as an adult, have shaped my scholarship on reproductive justice and kept it from being solely or even mainly an academic exercise. Since 2006, I have worked with National Advocates for Pregnant Women, NAPW, an organization that defends the basic principle that, upon becoming pregnant, a person should not lose any civil or human rights. Along with Executive Director Lynn Paltrow and our NAPW colleagues, we have identified hundreds of cases where women were arrested or otherwise deprived of physical liberty because they were pregnant. Women have been locked up in mental hospitals after voluntarily seeking treatment for an opiate addiction, tied down with leather wrist and ankle restraints, and forced to undergo cesarean sections, and charged with murder after surviving a suicide attempt but losing the pregnancy. Like death and dying, pregnancy and childbirth can be powerful experiences, but they may also be a time of vulnerability, a time when we may have to depend on others to ensure that our wishes are carried out, our decisions are respected, and our rights and dignity are preserved. Increasingly, however, we find that surveillance, blame, and punishment characterize our government responses to basic human needs rather than respect, support, and compassion. Our criminal prosecution system enforces ideas about who is fit to carry a pregnancy or mother a child and punishes those deemed to fall short. In this context, the rights of Black women and transgender non-conforming individuals to privacy, to health care, and to birthing and parenting their children with dignity are brutally disregarded. The contributors to this important volume write not only of the relationships between a parent and child and others in their lives, but also about the racism and other structural forces that threaten these ties. Addressing these threats requires that we recognize the connections between birth justice and other forms of social justice, including racial and economic justice and the movement to end the war on drugs. Fittingly, birthing justice also speaks to resilience and the power of collective action forged out of struggle. It reminds us that Black women and Black transgender non-conforming individuals continue to resist the devaluation of their personhood and to mobilize for social change. This book, and the advocacy and scholarship that inform and surround it, promise to energize and advance our movements in important ways. Birthing Justice accords experiences of pregnancy, birthing, and mothering respect, even reverence. Indeed, the creating and nurturing of new life and bringing it into the world, like the ways by which we take leave of it, deserve nothing less than this from all of us. Forward to the second edition. Alicia D. Bonaparte. My grandmother, Vella Coleman, the mother of 9 children and 2 stillborns, delivered all of her children with Black midwives in rural Mississippi. The births of each of my aunts, uncles, and mother happened at home due to the socio-political climate of the time, as well as the poverty of sharecropping. And yet, these birthing experiences showcased how the overlapping vulnerabilities of being Black, poor, and a woman did not prevent an inclusive, supportive, and collaborative at-home birth. Learning about my grandmother's birthing experiences shepherded my interest and puissant commitment to birthing justice. In the original forewords to this volume, Shafia Monroe and Jean Flavin commented upon the vulnerabilities of birthing people and described how physical liberties are violated within birthing settings. Since that time, much has happened within the landscape of Black maternal health. Our first printing strove to inspire Black women, women of color, trans folk, and other marginalized people to join in the struggle for birth justice, while also learning about the histories of the earliest and present contributors to birth justice. Birth workers, healthcare practitioners, academics, and the general public resonated with the personal testimonies and critical essays carefully curated in the first edition. The conceptualization of the text encouraged our readers to learn about how birthing people cope with trauma and loss and resist unnecessary medical interventions, and how present-day doulas and midwives navigate the medical industrial complex and its forms of surveillance and oppression. Our book also provided a roadmap for those working to empower pregnant people before birth and during birthing settings, and to organize for birth justice. A strong belief in the possibility of liberation while engaging health equity for birthing people functioned as a central core of our work. Since its publication, Birthing Justice has reached a diverse audience including birthing people, the general public, academics and practitioners, inspired new doulas and midwives of color, and become a key text used within private and public healthcare and educational sectors. Readers consistently shared with us that this work not only served as a guide for their praxis and inspiration for traditional adherences, but also as a reminder of the continued commitment to righting the wrongs committed by practitioners, policymakers, and proponents of interlocking axes of oppression. 8 years later, the need to fight for birth justice persists. Racial and economic justice continue to be thwarted on local, state, and national levels, and innumerable laws and policies have been passed in the intervening years that further disadvantage vulnerable communities and uplift heteropatriarchy and misogynoir. Despite the newfound visibility of health inequities and the crises in maternal health care, Black maternal and infant mortality rates have not significantly decreased, and more unnecessary medical interventions are thrust upon Black birthing people. The health and well-being of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, birthing people continues to suffer because of various intersecting crises, such as attacks on reproductive rights instituted by conservative judges appointed to the Supreme Court by former President Donald Trump, including the revocation of vital legislation such as Roe v. Wade. Coercive measures implemented at the state level, such as stipulations that pregnant women cannot finalize divorce during pregnancy, and cuts in sexual and reproductive health care budgets on state and national levels. These troubling trends laid the groundwork for more harmful maternal and infant health outcomes. Yet, more and more people are organizing for deeper and more progressive change and pushing back against the injustices enacted by the medical industrial complex. This continued birth justice revolution resulted in the emergence of a vocal and visible national grassroots movement with leadership from the Black Mamas Matter Alliance, BMMA, and Black Women Birthing Justice, BWBJ, both described in this volume. The inception of the Black Mamas Matter Conference and Black Maternal Health Week, and Shades of Blue's maternal mental health advocacy and interventions. Their work, alongside conferences such as Decolonizing Birth, disentangle the role of interlocking oppressions and promote newer and more progressive ways to engage birthing populations of color, from inclusive birthing traditions such as ancestor veneration to advancing newer birthing centers like Common Sense Childbirth. They also illuminate the pressing need for less debate and more support for the Black Maternal Health Caucus, the Momnibus Bill, and the CARE Act's provisions geared towards protecting and maintaining good reproductive health care practices and outcomes. This second edition, with exciting new content about developments in the past 8 years, from local responses to the novel coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic, to national organizing for policy change, asks listeners to delve more deeply into how we can build a movement for lasting change. As Thelma Kelgati states in her poem, We Black Mothers, can we write a new script? Can we turn the tide? Can we confront reality honestly? This has got to be a movement, not a moment. As Kelly Davis Durow, Executive Director, New Voices for Reproductive Justice, co-founder and chief equity officer at Kinshift contends, we seek accountability and dismantling long-standing systems of harm as we simultaneously prophesize a vision for a brand new world. Contributors to the new edition honor the continued work of long-term advocates and highlight some of the newer coalitions among doulas and midwives, practitioners and health scholars, as well as addressing the impacts of the ongoing novel coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic on reproductive health care experiences for BIPOC birthing people. This edition adds important content about the role of breastfeeding advocacy and the history of breastfeeding proponents and antagonists. Such discussions are vital in conversations about how birthing parents navigate sustenance not only for themselves, but also their children. This volume engages listeners to once again revisit the necessity of birthing justice in conversations and interventions geared towards bodily autonomy, health policy construction and implementation, as well as noting current efforts and successes in reforming reproductive health care. We encourage our old and new audiences to see the connections between the contents of birthing justice and current policy discussions, as well as broader conversations about the state of Black maternal health from a Pan-African and diasporic standpoint. These stories and essays are not only heralds, but also the continuation of a call for collective action. It is our sincere hope that hearing the works of our contributors incites new advocacy, as well as providing fuel for ongoing efforts, brings further recognition to birthing justice warriors, and centralizes the voices of Black birthing people around the world. Audre Lorde asked us to not be afraid, but rather to dare to be powerful. We invite you to see the impassioned words in these evocative essays as an entreaty to use your voices towards a collective vision of revolution that will usher in health equity, freedom, and agency. Introduction. Beyond Coercion and Malign Neglect, Black Women and the Struggle for Birth Justice. Julia Chinyere Opara. Birth Stories. A Beginning. When I got pregnant with my first daughter, I was just 19. My mother was a doula, and I had listened to enough stories to know that I wanted a natural birth. I wanted to labor at home, I didn't want medicine, and I wanted her to coach me through it. But I had little idea how much stood in the way of my vision for my birth. At my 38-week prenatal visit, the doctor announced that my blood pressure was too high and I needed to have the baby right then. I was rushed to delivery, hooked up to an IV, and strapped with wires to monitor my blood pressure and the baby's heartbeat. I felt like a patient, unable to resist the things they were doing to my body. By now, I was scared. My blood pressure kept going up, and I felt completely powerless and unable to move. They gave me Pitocin, and the labor pains started to get really painful. The contractions were so harsh and artificial. My mother arrived and tried to coach me, but the pain was too intense. So I told them to give me the epidural. I lay in the bed defeated and powerless until I was fully dilated and feeling the pressure to push. But there was no doctor around, and so the nurses told me to wait. Finally, the doctor came, and I pushed until I was tired and I didn't want to do it anymore. But Mom said, "If you don't push her out, they're going to cut you." When Zanea came, she was only 4 pounds, 14 ounces. They took her away from me, the doctor stitched me up, and the nurse put me in a wheelchair and took me to a postpartum room. They didn't clean me up. I remained covered in blood and afterbirth for about 6 hours until an African-American nurse came and washed me. It was just horrible. It was hard for us to breastfeed because Zanea wasn't latching on. One nurse put a tube on my nipple with formula to encourage her, but another nurse told me I should just give her a bottle. By the time we got home, the connection with my baby just wasn't there. The relationship was hard, and I was in pain. It took some time to get over the postpartum depression and gain my confidence as a new mother. I started to believe that women should not feel this way after bringing life into this world. I read up about the medical industry and started my journey to becoming a birth revolutionary. When I got pregnant again 2 years later, we decided to have a home birth so that I could be fully active and present for the birth. I pushed out Zwenna, squatting in my bathroom, encouraged by the sweet voice of my midwife and surrounded by my community. Renisha ends her story and breathes deeply, as if to absorb fully what she has shared. There are tears, laughter, and murmurs of affirmation as the women sitting around her honor her testimony. This is a sharing circle, an intimate healing space where Black women come together to share stories of pain, struggle, joy, and transformation in order to make sense of our experiences, heal birth trauma, and create an alternative vision of birth in Black communities. Who would like to share next? Chinyere begins her story. A few days after I learned that I was finally pregnant, I found myself in the hospital. A reaction to a fertility drug I had taken led to a buildup of fluid in my abdomen, and my belly swelled as if I were 6 months pregnant. When the pressure on my lungs began to make me gasp for breath, I was rushed to the hospital. I began a 10-day fight for my daughter's life and for my own. By the time I left the hospital, I was weak, anemic, 10 pounds underweight, and drained of confidence in my body. My OB/GYN did nothing to rebuild my faith in my body's natural ability to birth. Instead, pointing to my advanced maternal age and fibroids, she was dismissive of my desire for a vaginal birth. I was so demoralized that I continued obediently to show up for the stressful and speedy checkups without thinking that perhaps it could be different. In my final trimester, a prenatal yoga instructor asked me a question that began my journey to birth justice. Do the people who will be at your birth support your vision for your birth experience? At my next doctor's visit, I asked her if she would support me in seeking a vaginal birth. It became clear that she might not even be at my birth, that I could be faced with a stranger in that most intimate and vulnerable moment, and that any birth plan I developed with her would be irrelevant. I asked Spirit for courage, and at 8 months, I left my OB/GYN and hired one of only 2 midwives licensed to deliver babies at my local hospital. The few visits I had with my midwife were miraculous. She was part grandmother, part therapist, and part midwife. I had found her just in time. In the final weeks of my pregnancy, I began to deal with painful feelings related to having been relinquished by my mother at birth. It started when a wave of grief hit me as I walked past the newborns in the neonatal care unit after attending a birthing class. In the days and nights that followed, I experienced body memories of that early separation. The thought of going to a hospital to give birth terrified me. My midwife listened attentively and gently, but firmly talked with me about my fears. "This is your new birth story," she told me. "This time, you get to make it turn out differently." By the time I went into labor, I was beginning to step into my power. I invited a circle of women to witness and guide the birth, including my midwife, doula, and close friends. We turned the hospital room into a sanctuary. With their support, pushing out my baby girl was a powerful, sacred, and healing experience. These stories teach us a great deal about Black women and the maternal health care system in the United States. It may be tempting to consider them as cautionary tales about what happens when a patriarchal medical establishment seeks to control women's bodies, or as uplifting affirmations of women's ability to take back their power and birth naturally. But this would ignore the complexity of Black women's experiences of pregnancy and childbirth, which are shaped not simply by violence and coercion by patriarchal institutions, but also by the multifaceted ways in which gender interacts with interlocking systems of race, class, age, ability, sexuality, and nation. Renisha's desire to determine her own birth story was undermined by race, class, gender-based controlling images of irresponsible Black pregnant teens and by dismal statistics regarding Black infant and maternal mortality. Despite birth rates that have declined significantly since the early 90s, Black girls in the United States remain twice as likely to give birth as white teens. Their children are more likely to drop out of high school, experience incarceration, have health problems, become teenage parents, and face unemployment as a young adult. Since the early 1980s, conservatives and liberals alike have constructed teen pregnancy as a serious social problem and created programs to reduce it. The former by promoting chastity and parental control, the latter by improving teens' access to sex education and contraception. Despite their different political agendas, these programs share in common a tendency to censure teen mothers, to assume that all teen pregnancies are the outcome of irresponsible sex, and to incorporate a heavy dose of paternalism and judgment of teens who are deemed in need of greater personal responsibility regarding sex. Viewed through the lens of this narrative of Black teenage irresponsibility, Renisha was assumed to be incompetent to determine her own labor, delivery, and postpartum experience. Her desires to experience childbirth without medical interventions and to nurse her low birth weight baby were easily dismissed. Renisha's interactions with medical staff were also impacted by the specter of high rates of Black infant and maternal mortality. In the United States, these poor outcomes spark a fear of litigation in case of maternal or infant death. In California, where Renisha gave birth, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to perish due to pregnancy-related causes than white women, and their babies are more than twice as likely to die within their first year. OB/GYNs may be particularly fearful of litigation when they serve low-income women, partly because of higher risk factors and partly due to the belief that poor women sue more, leading to defensive medicine and more medical interventions. This culture of fear is an ever-present undercurrent in labor and delivery wards and is evoked by medical staff who use the question, "You do want a healthy baby, don't you?" to elicit compliance in unruly birthing women. Only when she removed herself from medical supervision was Renisha able to find a space for agency as a young Black woman choosing to deliver and nurse her baby. Whereas Renisha pushed out her second baby in her home in deep East Oakland, a neighborhood impacted by gun violence, drug dealing, and poverty, Chinyere lived in a solidly middle-class neighborhood in the East Oakland Hills. Class matters, but not always in the way we...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?